Welcome back to Around the 412. We are part of the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I am Tyler, and with me as always is my co-host Smitty. What's going on, man? We have been sitting in this call for over an hour. We thought we were going to be able to record earlier, but it turns out that the Chargers and the Raiders wanted to go to overtime and give everybody in the city a heart attack. How are you feeling right now?
As long as they could play Sunday Night Football, they did. 2 seconds left on the clock, and the Raiders finally kicked the field goal in overtime to win this football game. Had they tied, the Steelers are out. Both teams are in. But hey, shout out to the Raiders. It looked like for a long time there that they were going to win. At one point, up 15 points in the fourth quarter. They blew that lead just to end up winning in overtime. So the Steelers will travel to Kansas City. Yes, the Steelers are somehow a playoff team, and I can't wait to break it down and try to figure out how in the world this team did make it into the playoffs. You go back and listen to past episodes, you wouldn't think that that was going to be the case, or we thought that would be
Absolutely
the case.
Not.
But they do.
Also, hopefully they do show up to Kansas City this time.
Yeah. Yeah, at least make it a good football game. Kansas City, unlike last time, probably will have Travis Kelce out there. So that obviously adds a different dynamic to that offense. Not that they needed him the first time. Even Tyreek Hill only had like 2 catches against us. It was really the other guys that really killed the Steelers. But now they have them on tape. So I don't know if that's going to make a difference. Hopefully it will. Hopefully they make it a game. But let's just talk about this game first and foremost that we played before we dive into that matchup with Kansas City next Sunday night, 8:15, Sunday Night Football. This same great crew that you just got to watch, Chris Collinsworth, root for a tie, will be calling the Steelers game next week in Kansas City. Let's talk about this game in Baltimore. Pittsburgh goes on the road to M&T Bank Stadium. Really, I think this game pretty much just summarized the entire AFC, maybe NFL as a whole this year, in that it was just a war of attrition. It just looked like 2 football teams that couldn't do anything on offense. Both defenses looked pretty solid. Obviously, the Steelers relied a lot on their pass rush and generating turnovers. They get 3 in this game. But, down the stretch, now here's what I'll say. Down the stretch, Ben Roethlisberger, and Tomlin alluded to this after too, he's as cool as a cucumber, regardless of the situation. 39 years old, there's nothing he hasn't seen, 18 years in the league. They had, 2 third down conversions or something like that in all of regulation, the first 60 minutes, and then they convert 3 third downs in overtime to set up Chris Boswell for that game-winning field goal. And I'm not in agreement with that. He should be a huge part of the offense, but you got to tip your cap a little bit to Ray McLeod today as well. Not only in the kick return game where I thought he probably had his best day in that aspect, but that crucial 4th down conversion that allowed Chris Boswell to kick that game winner as well.
Yeah, and a couple plays earlier, all of Pittsburgh was ready to run him out of town. But yeah, it was a great thing for him to get that 4th down conversion, obviously. And I'm just surprised by this team more than anything. I mean, I didn't know if they could win. Looking at the back half of their schedule, it looks so tough. And this game specifically, going into Baltimore, I'm like, okay, they swept them last year, but what's the odds they sweep them this year? They won earlier in Pittsburgh, but they went in there and did it. I understand they didn't have Lamar Jackson. The Ravens didn't. They had Tyler Huntley. But Tyler Huntley had shown that he was a decent backup quarterback, and he's played he's played pretty well for the Ravens. But the Steelers just found a way to win, and now they find themselves in a playoff spot.
See, that's what's so perfect about this game, and really this ending to the regular season for Ben Roethlisberger. Now we don't know what's going to happen in the playoffs here, but you look at just the last couple of games here against Cleveland and Baltimore. Is there a more perfect way to summarize and wrap up Ben Roethlisberger's regular season career as a Pittsburgh Steeler than the way that they beat the Browns on Monday Night Football, and then going to Baltimore, kind of where it all started for Ben as a Pittsburgh Steeler, and getting that win the way that they did it? It's never looked pretty for Ben in his career, but somehow finding a way to squeak out a W by any means necessary, whether that's the defense forcing turnovers. They just always have found a way with Ben Roethlisberger at quarterback to win football games. That's again the case here. They finish the season 9-7-1, just a 3-5 record on the road, but 6-2-1 at home. And that just kind of goes to show, as I brought up, by the way, I don't think we mentioned it, but great to finally have the two of us back together, because it's been one or the other the last few weeks. But as I mentioned last time, that I was doing a show. It's like, man, night and day difference what this team is at home as opposed to on the road. And you hope that they can find some of that consistency. Obviously, they're not going to have a home game in the playoffs. We know that, regardless of who they're matching up with each round. But yeah, I mean, this is, to me, the best possible way that Ben Roethlisberger could go out. Anything on top of this at this point, when you think about the roster that they gave him, how bad the offensive line is, the COVID issues, the injuries, anything that happens besides making the playoffs is really just icing on the cake. They've accomplished more than I thought that they would. I'm just happy that in his last year, we got to see them clinch another playoff berth.
Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier today, especially whenever the Steelers won, is that even if the game ends in a tie tonight or last night on Sunday Night Football between the Chargers and the Raiders, I think that getting a win last week against the Browns the way they did, this week against the Ravens, even if they don't make the playoffs, that would be a perfect send-off for Ben Roethlisberger. I understand it would be disappointing for the fans and for the team that they couldn't get in, but I just think the way that these last two games, and against these two opponents as well, it makes a huge difference whenever you're the daddy of the Cleveland Browns and the biggest rivalry in football for the last 20 years, the last 2 weeks. I just think that it would have been a perfect send-off. And anything extra, like going to the playoffs, would just basically be house money on time for Ben. So now, for my opinion, and maybe he feels differently, obviously he wants to win, go to a Super Bowl, everything like that. But as a fan perspective, I just think this is just any extra time given to me to watch Ben Roethlisberger as the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the Jacksonville Jaguars for beating the Indianapolis Colts. Not even just beating, they just completely trashed them. And thank you for Daniel Carlson for not being a wuss like Chris Collinsworth, hoping for a tie and actually sending the Raiders to the playoffs and sending the Chargers home crying.
I know that you saw that fan that had the sign that said "Play for the tie." Did you see that?
Yeah.
I mean,
listen,
you're talking about.
I get it's a
same division.
Yeah, and I get it's a smart idea to really play safe and play conservative, and you really want to both get in, then play for a tie or whatever. But that's just the softest thing that I've ever heard of, is playing for the tie. Now, if it actually happened, I would have been pissed. But I also actually I tweeted a little or before or after the Steelers won their game. I'm like, if the Chargers and Raiders tie, I think it will actually kind of be hilarious that is the only thing that could have kept the Steelers out at that point.
What would have happened? They're going to both celebrate on the field. I mean, how does that work? If that would
I have no idea.
Once the Raiders got the ball back and once they were at like the 40, 35, 30-yard line, I was like, man, I mean, the Raiders, like the Chargers aren't going to do anything with the ball even if they get it back. The Raiders should be trying to win this football game. What's the worst that can happen is they end up, a lower seed maybe if they were to somehow tie, but there was no chance of them losing that game at that point. We were on the edge of my seat. I mean, you were watching it with me. I was lighting candles. That didn't work out very well.
Both times you lit a candle. A huge play for the Chargers to force it into OT.
So, but yeah, I mean, shout outs to the Raiders. The Steelers are going to go to Kansas City. Real quick, more about this game. I think kind of an underrated play for me. That Minkah Fitzpatrick pass breakup on Hollywood Brown in overtime.
Oh yeah,
which would have put the Ravens like right on the cusp of field goal range if that was a completed pass. But at the last second, he breaks that up. And, that kind of goes more just another thing to add into the tip of the cap of Minkah Fitzpatrick, where it's like, even when he's not getting these turnovers, those are the types of impact plays he's making that people aren't talking about because it's not a turnover, and that's what makes him one of the best safeties in football. The fact that he has the tackle numbers this year are atrocious. I hate it. The fact that he has as many tackles as he does really just speaks to the middle linebackers more than anything else, but also the defensive front. But for me, that was the play of the game, and I don't even know that they get talked about a whole lot.
I thought that was a huge play. I noticed it right away when it happened, and just talking about Minkah Fitzpatrick, you mentioned his tackles and how bad the middle linebackers were. How bad was Devin Bush once again today? I mean, is this guy going to be a starting linebacker next year for the Steelers? Like, how can he be at this point?
So I'm going to say, yeah. Not that I necessarily agree that he should be, but I want to go back to last week against Cleveland and just say how is it possible that they look better facing a superior running back in Nick Chubb with Marcus Allen and Robert Spillane as the two linebackers than they did today? And that's where I want to I want you to answer that, give any opinion you might have on it, and then we're gonna go to a break here. But what is the reason? Like, why is that the case with Marcus Allen, who we both don't think is obviously suitable to play middle linebacker, but he was thrown in there last week due to injury?
I don't know if it was maybe just the direty of the moment for those two linebackers with Spillane and Allen, but maybe just something within them made them play better. I know that skill-wise, they should not be better than Devin Bush or Joe Schobert. Like, neither of them. But they were in that game. And today, it was very evident of how bad. I think today is like a sum up of how bad of a Devin Bush season that he has had overall. It's just been very disappointing, and I don't know if it's just mental, if it's the knee still, or it looks like he doesn't know how to play football. He's just taking on blocks and not getting off of them. He's doing exactly what linebackers are not supposed to do.
Yeah, he's really just waiting for that block to get there as opposed to playing downhill and taking on anything, really. I mean, he's not that he's somebody that's really going to shed blocks to begin with, but he's letting them climb to that second level and really doing nothing about it. He doesn't look like the same player. It's really unfortunate. Hopefully, another offseason, he'll get back to himself. I want to talk more about the Steelers. We're obviously going to dive into this a little bit more, preview this matchup in Kansas City. Sunday Night Football next week. Pittsburgh Steelers are going to the playoffs. We're going to talk about it more. We'll be right back. This is Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. Welcome back to Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I am Smitty. That is Tyler. Let's talk more about the Pittsburgh Steelers, who I keep saying it because I'm still trying to believe it. Let me see here. Yeah, I'm pinching myself, and it's still a reality. The Pittsburgh Steelers are going to the playoffs. They're going to head up to Kansas City next Sunday night, 8:15, Sunday Night Football. I'm looking forward to the fact that, like you mentioned in that first segment, man, we're just getting at least 4 more quarters of Ben Roethlisberger. And this is really just, I know it sounds bad because, like, you obviously want to win every game. The hopes are always to win a Super Bowl. But just the fact for me that we are in the playoffs, looking at this roster, how the season's gone a lot of the times, really just icing on the cake to me, the fact that they're playing in a playoff game for these guys like Najee Harris, Pat Freiermuth, the rookies to get some playoff experience, to get at least one game of playoff experience under their belt. Guys that, made their playoff debuts last year, they're getting at least a second game here. So that's big in that aspect, regardless of what the result is. But yeah, it's hard for me to complain about anything else that happens at this point, just because it looked very bleak at times this year, and it kind of just became about Ben more than the football games, right? Like, you were just thinking, no matter what, they're going to win. At one point, it looked like maybe they'd win 6 games, and it was like, okay, well, whatever. This is just Ben's, farewell tour, and it's just about sending him off the right way, as we were able to do against Cleveland on Monday Night Football. But now we're talking about them playing in a playoff game, going up to Kansas City. I mean, let's talk about it. Are you giving them any type of shot to be able to go up to Kansas City and upset the Chiefs, who really, I mean, I would have loved to have. I think they match up way better against the Titans. I would have loved for the Titans to fall to that too. Didn't happen. But it's hard to look at the Chiefs and Steelers on paper, even think that they're even in the same sport, really, right now. Honestly, They look to like 2 completely different levels of football teams.
Listen, as much as I'd love to give the Steelers any kind of shot in this game, I just don't know how I could pull myself to do it because of what we saw a couple weeks ago in Kansas City. Whenever they lost 36-10, they didn't even look like they showed up to Arrowhead. And like you talked after that game, just saying how the team just looked like they were completely lost. They didn't look like they were even playing football in the same level as the Kansas City Chiefs. I just think that, as much, like I said, as much as I'd love to say, there's always a chance, because technically there's always a chance. I just think the Chiefs are too good, and they don't match up well. I just think that the offensive scheme of the Chiefs just overpowers the Steelers defense. I don't think they have a matchup to really keep up with Tyreek Hill What are you going to do with Travis Kelce this time? They didn't have him in their previous matchup, and they won 36-10. Now, what are they going to do with him?
Right.
So, no, I don't really give them much of a chance, but that's why I'm like, I really don't think I'm going to be disappointed either way, whether they win or well, obviously if they win, I'm not going to be disappointed. But if they lose, I just don't know how I could be disappointed from where we were at the beginning of the season, even like a month into the season, what we thought this team was going to do. Like I said, as a Steelers fan, you're basically playing with house money right now. The fact that you're even in the playoffs is just an anomaly, honestly, and it's an anomaly. I just don't know how they got here. Honestly, this team, whether you think they deserve to be there or not, that's up to you. But there's times of this season where they looked like one of the worst teams in the league, and somehow they make the playoffs. So I got to give them credit.
I think that speaks really to the mediocrity of a lot of the teams in the AFC. I am absolutely floored by the fact that the Chargers are not going to be in the playoffs, because coming into the year, I thought they were like the third best team in the AFC behind the Chiefs and Bills. And they're going to be sitting at home now. The Raiders and Steelers are the only two teams in the playoffs that have a negative point differential. What I will say about not giving them any type of shot is that, I understand it's the playoffs, it's a different atmosphere. No one was giving Jacksonville a shot today, and that's the only reason the Steelers are even in the playoffs. So never say never, but they're opening up as like 13.5-point underdogs from what I saw today, which is a pretty high amount considering it's a playoff game. You never really see those totals come for playoff games. As far as how they match up on paper, I already said I thought they matched up a hell of a lot better against a team like the Titans. I was hoping that was who they would draw, and Kansas City get the one. But it is what it is. They're going to have to go to Kansas City, and hopefully they saw enough on tape to get some mismatches. I have no clue. You can't shut down that offense. It's more about containing it. They actually contained Tyreek Hill relatively okay, but you saw, the Byron Pringles of the world be able to eat because of that, even without Travis Kelce. And now Travis Kelce coming into the fold, how do you neutralize that? There were some guys that the Steelers were missing in that game too. I know Chris Wormley didn't play, and although we didn't at the beginning of the year think that would be a huge deal, he has been a major contributor, obviously, to this team. On the offensive side, there was no Pat Freiermuth for that game. We know how big of a difference maker he is. So, there's different pieces on both sides here. But, on paper, it's clearly Kansas City that should be a two-score favorite. I just, as I said, really about every game down the stretch here, once the Steelers kind of had their backs against the wall after that loss to the Vikings, it's empty the tank. Literally every player in this, especially Ben, but literally everybody else, empty the tank. You have nothing to lose here. You mentioned it. You're playing with house money. Everything else is kind of, icing on the cake. Go out there and have your best 60 minutes of football. Shock the world.
Yeah, I got to say, just to go back on one thing you said, where you got to contain their offense. It's kind of a double-edged sword, because not only do you have to contain them if you're the Steelers defense, but if you're the Steelers offense, you also have to play to keep up, because they're a team that if you're playing from behind, like it's hard to keep up with that offense. But like you said, they're getting some players back. I wonder what is going to happen with Najee. I know he hurt his elbow. He did come back in this game against the Ravens, but it's a little different after the
use that though.
That's the thing. It's a little different after the injury sets in and it starts to swell and it starts to, like, your tendons could get stiff. I don't know what's going to do to the elbow. I mean, it was definitely hyperextended. But, I mean, if you're Najee, I imagine he's probably going to say, I don't care, wrap me up, put a brace on me. I want to play in this game. And they're going to need him, obviously. And I just think the only way that we have a shot in this game, and I'm not even talking about the defense stopping their offense or containing their offense, is if the offensive line has their best game that they've had all season.
You know what? I was just going to turn my attention to the offensive line, because we're sitting here talking about Najee, right? I think another rookie who they need to be back next week is going to play an important role here. Dan Moore did not play against the Ravens today. I didn't think, going back to what we saw at the beginning of the year, that would be a massive, loss going from him to somebody else at left tackle. It was. Joe Haid was awful. He did everything in his power to have the Steelers not make the playoffs today, along with several other guys on that offensive line. But I just, Dan Moore, his progression throughout the year, like, I think that there's some legit hope there that he is, I don't know about left tackle. Maybe he'd be better suited at right tackle, but either way, one of those two tackle spots, I think there is some legit hope that he can be, a future piece there, a future starter, and continue to just keep getting better and better. For a fourth round rookie, I think that he's well exceeded expectations this year. Held Myles Garrett off the sack sheet after he had that high ankle sprain in the first quarter, finished the game. Obviously didn't go this week, but if they can get him back next week, that to me is a huge upgrade over what we saw from the offensive line today, at least on the left side. What about, is Kevin Dotson going to be ready to be plugged back in there? He came off IR a couple weeks ago and has been practicing. So I think that would obviously be an upgrade for me. Not that John Lou's been bad, but Kevin Dotson's an obvious upgrade to me.
Right.
So I don't know.
You know what's an upgrade that they made a couple game. I would say an upgrade that they made last week, except we didn't even think it was going to be an upgrade at the start of the season, is putting in J.C. Hassenauer as center over Kendrick Green. And I hate to say that because, listen, if you're the Steelers in last year's draft, I love Pat Freiermuth. Don't get me wrong. I love him. But Creed Humphrey was there. And now you're going to be playing Creed Humphrey on Sunday against the Kansas City Chiefs. And there were a couple centers that were clear centers. They were when we were doing our mock drafts and everything, we weren't even thinking about Kendrick Green. We never mentioned him once. And then they ended up drafting him.
He wasn't listed as a center.
That is true. That is also true. He's only played four games in his career at center prior to being the Steelers. So I just don't know what the Steelers are thinking. It's kind of like the complete opposite of the Dan Moore Jr. pick. Daniel Moore Jr. was a nice prospect that we got he was a project tackle, and he ended up being better than we thought he was going to be right away. And he did a pretty solid job coming in as a first-year tackle as a fourth-round pick for the Steelers. Kendrick Green, was your replacement. He was going to be the same one that needed to start right away, and it was a confusing pick, but we're hoping, okay, maybe this guy will make it work, and he just never figured it out into the season. And the fact that we say J.C. Hassenauer, who you and I wanted nowhere near the top of the depth chart, has been an upgrade over him is just very disappointing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the return that we've gotten from Dan Moore, honestly, you see guys now, not obviously guys like Penei Sewell or, guys that are taking the top end of the draft play at a very high level right away. But maybe a second round pick. I feel like that's kind of the return that we've gotten from Dan Moore here, where it's he's played pretty much every game. You've seen the progression there. He looks like a guy that can start, long term. I feel like they've gotten pretty good value there in the fourth round. You mentioned the first and second round picks. They've obviously gotten good returns early there too. My question to you, and I'll ask this to everybody in the comments as well. Anybody that's in the live chat during the show or comments, you want to put it back in. Would you have rather had, this is completely hypothetical, obviously, Najee and Creed Humphrey, or it would have been considered a reach at the time, but taken Pat or Creed Humphrey at 24 and then the other one at 55. So Pat and Creed as opposed to Najee and Creed.
So basically which combination would I would have wanted to pick?
Right.
Oh, man, it's so tough because running back was such a clear need for the Steelers. But at the same time, tight end was a big need too. Eric Ebron was not great the season prior
because of Ebron not being available.
And how good Pat Freiermuth has been with hindsight. I just think that I probably would have kept the picks the same, but I would have changed my third round pick and not taken Kendrick Green.
Okay.
Because Najee's not changing. I'm taking Najee. But the only one that would have changed would be Pat Freiermuth. But seeing how the season progressed and how much of a need that he's been on that offense, I mean, realistically, 2 out of the 3 guys that are always productive offensively, but I'm not talking about Ben, is Deontay Johnson, Pat Freiermuth, and Najee Harris. 2 out of the 3 guys are the 2 guys that we drafted in the first and second round. And I just don't know if I could take that away from the offense and expect the same production if they have an upgraded center.
Yeah, I mean, hindsight's 2020, but I just keep hearing people say, they could have gone Creed and Pat and then still ended up with a back like Michael Carter or Ramondre Stevenson, who have both looked pretty good in their roles. Michael Carter is obviously more of a scat back, and the Steelers haven't had luck with that, so I don't know how he would have worked behind this.
I
Line,
mean,
obviously,
listen.
Creed Humphreyan, but
Yeah, I understand they would have had Creed Humphrey in this scenario, but you got the best running back in the draft, and you've seen how he's been able to struggle with this offensive line in front of him. I just don't think that Rondé Stevenson or Michael Carter would have done a better or even close to job that Najee Harris has done.
yeah, see, that's the whole thing with me. You know how I feel about running backs, like taking them in the first round, paying them. I'm typically against it. The thing is, when your offensive line is as bad as the Steelers is, you need a running back like Najee just to give you some semblance of like some pulse, some semblance of a run game. If he wasn't here, you get what we have seen in limited action from Benny Snell and Kalen Ballage. That would be what we're looking at. So
yeah. So what would have been the point? Yeah.
That's where I'll leave it with the run game with Najee. Predictions. Let's give a prediction for next Sunday night. Steelers going to Arrowhead.
I'll give a little bit of hope. I'll say that the game is closer than their previous matchup a few weeks ago. But unfortunately, I just cannot pick the Steelers to win this game. And I've already said my reasons as to why. But I'm just looking to enjoy Ben Roethlisberger one last time in this game. We thought that it could be today or yesterday, but it was extended out for another week. So I'll say that the Steelers are going to lose. I'll be optimistic and say they hold them to 31, and I'll say that the Steelers put up 17. I'll give them 17.
Okay. Well, that's actually pretty close to mine. I'm saying 27-17 Chiefs.
Okay.
So kind of in that same ballpark. Either way, it looks like so Ben Roethlisberger, his first career touchdown pass went to Veron Haynes, a running back. His last, now unless not including the postseason, Chase Claypool.
Right.
Which I got to give Chase some credit today too. I thought that he played pretty well, considering obviously Ben didn't have his best day and the elements of the weather didn't really help out either. But the way that they used Chase, I thought, I've been on Matt Canada all year. I don't think he should be back for a second year, but even some of these end arounds, like that's how I want to get a guy like Chase Claypool the ball, is get him the ball in space. If he's not going to be winning those contested catches, and he hasn't for most of the year, he's got to be running these like short crossing patterns and getting him the ball like that out of the backfield. Just because he's so dynamic when the ball is in his hands, you just got to get it in his hands, get him the ball in space.
Yeah, he averaged 11 yards per carry today, which it led the team, obviously.
Our Deebo Samuel.
Our Deebo Samuel. Yeah, Najee Harris only averaged 2.5. He did get injured, though, like I said. But what a great catch by him also in overtime. The one-handed catch to get the first down. We didn't mention that either. That just shows like the athleticism that Najee has for how big he is too. 6'1", 232 pounds or something like that. He's got the speed, he's got the size, but he also has that athleticism that he can receive as well. I mean, I said at the beginning of the year that I think that he was the wrong pick and they should have taken a tackle or something else to improve the line or something. But I've come around to saying, like, no, I'm so happy that Najee's a Steeler. I think he was a great pick. He was the right pick at the time, and hopefully they improve the offensive line in front of him. But I'm happy to watch him for the next 4 to 5 years.
You got to do it fast. Yeah, with shelf life of running backs, they got to improve that offensive line fast to give them a shot. Last thing, actually, I wanted the score prediction to be our last thing. I can't believe I forgot about this, though. He tied the sack record today. Did T.J. Watt, Michael Strahan, 22.5. Unless they go back and stack correct that.
Can you explain to me how that's not a sack? If the quarterback fumbles the ball, picks it up, he's still able to throw it, so he's still a quarterback. How is that not a sack and just not a tackle for loss? That should be a sack.
I don't know. And then he loses out on a half one because of that Cam Hayward personal foul as well. He would have had a half a sack on that. So he had 2 different shots at breaking the record there, but at least for right now, he's tied with Michael Strahan. I want to say, well, okay, let me ask you a question first, then I'll say something else. Does this make TJ Watt the defensive player of the year?
Yes. he tied the sack record. And I know freaking Al Michaels on Sunday Night Football was like, well, there's another asterisk. It was in 17 games. No, Al Michaels, it was in 15 games, but he really only played in the majority of 14 games. One of the games he only played in the first half of them. It was in the beginning of the year. I forget which one it was. But
there's actually 3 games where he's played a half or less.
Yeah, so the fact that he's been able to do that and tie the sack record, let alone maybe beat it if the statisticians or whatever you say at the NFL, whatever if they want to be nice, it's an absolute joke. Shut up, Al Michaels. Shut up, Chris Collinsworth. That whole crew.
Here's the thing too. Like, do they realize that the NFL expanded from 14 to 16 games in the past? So, like, do the 16 game records not?
Is that all an asterisk?
Is that yeah? Okay, but
I don't know.
So the last thing that I wanted to say then is how important is the Steelers making the playoffs for that? Like, do you think that he still wins Defensive Player of the Year if the team doesn't make the playoffs? Because history doesn't bode well for that being the case.
I just think that it's such a significant stat that they would have. They would have ended up having a winning record still, even if they don't make the playoffs. And the fact that they got to that is a miracle in my eyes in some ways. And I think that stat is so hard to break. We've seen it over the years. It's held for over 20 years. And the fact that no one's been able to exceed that, Justin Houston got close a few years ago, but I just think that the way that he played this year, the stats that he put up, and the amount of games that he played in, and the amount of snaps that he took in those games, I think if you added all that up, then he needed to be Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah, I'm with you. By the way, Myles Garrett's not even number 2. Shout out Micah Parsons. When we come back to wrap up the show, we're going to talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins. The 10-game winning streak is over. However, no reason to panic. This team is in a really good spot. Another reinforcement coming back here in the very near future. We will talk about that and much more. This is Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. Welcome back to Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. Let's wrap up talking about some Pens hockey. Evan Rodrigues, still Evan Rodrigues. What a player he has turned into. Doesn't matter if he's playing with Sidney Crosby, second line center. Throw him wherever you want. This guy's a Swiss Army knife for Mike Sullivan. He just continues to produce. What more can you say about this guy? He's become somebody that I think you got to re-sign. I'm going to ask you a question about it a little bit later on, but what more can we really say about Evan Rodrigues really breaking out this year? And I think the advanced numbers show that this isn't a fluke. Like this guy's for real. This is a legit player we're talking about here.
No, I want to know what he did in the offseason to really turn his game around, because not that he was ever a bad player, but he was on the top line at the start of the last season. And we were like, it's not that he's playing terribly there. We just don't think that he's in the right place. But he was on the top line for multiple times this season. He was centering the second line, centering the third line, and moved back up to the top line after Brian Rust tested positive for COVID, and he's continued to produce. And I don't know what more we can say about this guy. I just think that he needs to, like you said, probably be on this team for more than just this year. I think that he's done so well, and he's been so consistent with it too. It's not just a flash in the pan. We've seen guys all over the league that can be flash in the pans that aren't typically so, but he's just done it the entire season. He's got 30 points in 34 games, which is an unreal clip for him. 15 goals, 15 assists. Shout out James Winston. Even is perfect. I just think that there's not much more I can say about this guy other than he's been outstanding this season.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm glad that you brought up Rust. I do want to say real quick, you mentioned him going on the COVID list, so they lose him and Brock McGinn to the COVID protocol while getting Jeff Carter back. And it's a shame. Brian Rust, who really, I know that he has missed a lot of time this year, but when he's played, the numbers have been great. He just had, 6 goals last week. really kind of ramping his game up back on the top line. I was skeptical about that, honestly, because I thought, man, how can you take Evan Rodrigues off that top line and just put Brian Rust right back in it? But hey, the offense was clicking as soon as they put Brian Rust back in that spot, and that's also a shout out to Evan Rodrigues being able to play anywhere. Let me ask you this, though. So we know Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, they are free agents at the end of the year. Obviously, the team wants to lock them up to extensions and keep them around so they can finish their careers in Pittsburgh. Brian Rust and Evan Rodrigues are also both free agents. Which one, if you could only pick one, are you bringing back between those two? I also want to know what everybody else thinks. I think it's a much tougher decision. Like, imagine asking yourself this at the beginning of the year, right? But I think it's a much tougher decision as we sit here right now, taking in all factors: price point, term, the age of the players. I mean, everything comes into play here.
So Evan Rodrigues is 28 years old. Brian Rust is 29 years old. They both had great years. Rust has done it for a long time. Rodrigues has done it for a shorter amount of time. But here's the one thing I'll say that it gives an edge to Evan Rodrigues is the fact that he can play center and he can play on center on different lines as well and still be the same productive player. Yeah. I don't know that I'd still pick Evan Rodrigues over Brian Rust. I think that financially it could be the smarter decision. You could probably sign him for cheaper than Rust in a shorter term. However, right. I don't know that would be my pick, but giving that he plays center, it's just like it gives that double edge because Brian Rust, he's never played center. And obviously Brian Rust can play on multiple lines as well, but Evan Rodrigues can center multiple lines, and I think that is a little more important.
Yeah, I really, it's hard to say, right, what we think Evan Rodrigues is going to make on his next contract, just because it is such, short-term thing that we're talking about. I said I don't think it's a fluke. Doesn't mean other teams are all going to feel that way, though. So I don't know. And obviously, the way that he's thrived in Sullivan's system, does he want to play somewhere else? If you have your best success here. I'm sure Brian Rust isn't itching to get out of Pittsburgh either with the success that he's had here. I just think that there could be a multi-million-dollar difference here in terms of the players. And is there a multi-million-dollar difference in terms of what they're going to get? But is there a multi-million-dollar difference in terms of the players and the returns they're going to give you coming back? If we're talking about giving Brian Rust over, $6 million for 4 or 5 years, or giving Evan Rodrigues like 3 years in between, 3.5, 4.5, that's an easy decision in my opinion.
Personally, even if we weren't going to consider signing Rodrigues, I wouldn't want to give Russ that contract, the over $6 million for 5. Yeah,
that's fair. Yeah.
5 years. I just personally wouldn't want to do that. But I think another wrench to throw in this conversation is Jeff Carter's on the last year of his deal as a Penguin. Do the Penguins consider bringing him back as well? Does he retire? What are they going to do with that third line center spot?
Evan Rodrigues. And that's what I was going to get at. I think that Jeff Carter, not that Jeff Carter's like itching to retire. I got to get out of here. I think though, like his family isn't here. They're on the West Coast still. I think his idea was playing out this contract. I think he wanted to end it in Pittsburgh. I think this is his last year in the NHL, and he calls it quits after this. But that's why, like, Evan Rodrigues becomes the more intriguing option of the two, is because what he's shown you, he can be that center instead of Jeff Carter. Like, we have a replacement. You don't have to go searching for a center. We know Evan Rodrigues can be that guy. And if you're bringing Gino back, which we assume that he comes back and is close to the same player, we want to give him an extension to finish his career here. Obviously, Teddy Bluder's still in house. You have your 4 center options right there, and hopefully that works out.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that Evan Rodrigues could be that third line center option, and you could, sign him for a multi-year deal and lock up that position. That way you don't have to worry about it, because we talked about it many times on this show. The center depth in the Penguins organization is terrible. They've got their 4 centers. There was
some guy named Jared McCann that used to be around here, but
yeah, that's true. There was also Freddie Gaudreau, who's playing in Minnesota now. But yeah, the organizational depth at center is terrible, so they need to lock up that position whenever they can. So if they have that as a future for Evan Rodrigues, that's a smart thing to do.
Absolutely. But let's just talk about the team then a little bit while we are here. That 10-game win streak did come to an end at the hands of the Dallas Stars. It's, you knew it was going to come to an end, but like that, it's just tough. They do have to a great start. They're up 2-0 for a good portion of that game. And then the Stars scored 2 goals in like the last 3.5 minutes to win this game in regulation. The Penguins don't even get a point after leading by 2 for so long. So obviously a disappointing way to end that win streak, but they had played 3 games in 4 days, but really 3.5 because they played at 2 p.m. On Saturday afternoon. So,
Right.
with how much hockey they've played, they had to play that game with 11 forwards and 7 defensemen due to McGinn and Russ getting put in the protocol that same day. Just a tough situation. So there's nothing discouraging about what this team has done recently other than, and we can come kind of full circle because the last time that me and you actually were able to have a conversation on the show together, it looked like, maybe Casey DeSmith had turned a page here and could be the number 2 guy behind Tristan Jarry and take some of that load off of him. That he's reversed it. He's gone completely back to the Casey DeSmith that we saw at the beginning of the season. He was god awful in that Sunday afternoon game a week ago from yesterday, where who were they playing? Almost came back. They scored San Jose, scored 5 goals on Casey DeSmith out of nowhere. I think I snapped my fingers and all of a sudden it's 8-5. So he was really bad in that game. Really bad his next performance out. Thank goodness Tristan Jarry didn't miss too much time on the COVID list. But, once again, we got to bring up the question, like, when does this team need to go out and do something about this goaltending situation? If the backup goalie is your biggest problem, I think that shows where you are as a hockey team. But it is a problem, in my opinion, just because we've never seen Tristan Jarry, one, carry a massive, regular season workload. And 2, we are, I think, rightfully a little bit concerned about what's going to happen come playoff time. So
we still have PTSD.
Yeah. When does this team have to go out and address the goaltending situation in some fashion?
I think that it needs to be pretty soon. And I think that the first thing they should do is you've got Louis Domingue sitting down in the minors. If it's just for a backup role, I think they should give him a shot at it. He hasn't done terrible in the minors, so you signed him for a reason. I don't think they signed him just to have him as an AHL goalie. They signed him probably as a safety net for one of the 2 goalie spots in Pittsburgh, and so I think that they should do that first, is maybe give him 1 or 2 starts, see how he does at the NHL level over Casey DeSmith, because Casey DeSmith at this point is the reason that they're losing those games. And he has an .888 save percentage, 3.47 goals against average. And I know those are just the basic statistics. I don't know what the underlying numbers are, but I'm sure they are just terrible for him. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'm not asking him to be a Vezina level goalie. I just think you need at least, you do already have that, but you need at least a 900 save percentage from your backup, like someone that's not going to lose you the game. You need someone that at least is going to give you a chance, and you're just not getting that from Casey DeSmith. It's very disappointing because I liked him a lot, but I think they got to move on and try to find somebody that can be steady behind Tristan Jarry. He's been doing so well, but you cannot roll out Casey DeSmith and then basically be expecting a loss or expecting a very close game. Even when the Penguins scored 8 goals, there's no reason that game should have been as close as it was, but because of Casey DeSmith it was. And so I think that they first need to probably look at Louis Domingue just because he's in the system. They don't have to do anything in terms of like trades or anything with that, but give him a shot, give him a start or 2. Let's see what he does. Like trade him in with Casey DeSmith and see what he does in his starts. If he looks okay, then maybe you have something as a backup goalie. If not, then that's when you go to the trade market. And I don't know really any names to pull off the top of my head of who to look at, but I don't think it would be costing a lot to get a okay backup goalie, and in terms of like being better than Casey DeSmith, I don't think it's that hard to find. So I think that your first option is in-house. Second option, you have to go and look to find someone, just because if something happens to Tristan Jarry, whether it's maybe he's performing bad or what if he gets injured, you need somebody that you can trust to go in there and not just lose you the game.
Absolutely. And Louis Domingue was actually, I don't know if you remember, first episode we recorded on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network in studio was the day after Louis Domingue signed his player tryout or whatever here. So, yeah, full circle. But this guy, if you're watching on YouTube, Evgeny Malkin, is set to return in the very near future. Very well could be on this West Coast trip that the Pens are about to go on. He's been close. He's chomping at the bit. Really, the question is, where does he slot in? Who's he going to play with? how does he impact the power play? And is he going to be able to play within this Mike Sullivan system that we've seen thrive and is really the reason that this team is where they are right now?
I think he will. I think that Malkin is a good enough player that he's able to adjust and go right back into his form. And in terms of who he's going to play with, I think that the first person you need to put him back with is Kasperi Kapanen, just because he's the one that he had the most chemistry with on as a line mate. I think you try to rekindle something there. And when it comes to the power play, who you taking off that first power play? Like, is it going to be ever? I was like, how can it be Evan Rodrigues?
This year on the power play is the same conversations we had about Jared McCann last year.
Exactly. I just don't know if you can justify taking him off. But at that point, who did they put on the top power play on Saturday's game whenever Russ was out?
Oh,
because it was Sid, Jake, Evan,
Carter,
Chris, and then Jeff Carter. Okay, so I guess they put him to the second power play. Or, I mean, honestly, is it the end of the world if Gino's not on the first power play? Can you spread out the talent a little bit more?
See, the thing is, they haven't been good. Like, I'm looking for, like, a spark that he might be able to provide, like, actually improve then. I'm not worried about, like, oh, they've been so good recently, I want to mess up what they got going on. The power play has been, like, the weak part of this team. They've been okay recently. But, man, like, if they can find something, if they can spark that power play, we know how good the penalty kill has been. And it is even going to be better once they get Brock McGinn back, because he's been a huge part of that. Bringing him in has immensely helped the penalty kill. But I'm saying, like, I'm not worried about him hurting the power play. I'm wondering if he can give it a little bit of a spark. As far as we're talking about the playing, I did the Kasperi Kapanen thing. I guess that's where I become a little bit worried about the Sullivan system because of the lack of defense that those two are going to provide together. And then who's the other winger? Like a Danton Heinen? You know, I don't know that any combination of guys, if you're putting him with Kapanen, are going to be as good defensively. And I understand that what they could potentially provide offensively, but are we straying too far away from Sullivan's system by doing that?
Then maybe you do the thing that will never happen and you put Jake on Gino's line. It will never happen, but that's something that I've always wanted. Whenever Zucker's playing, I want Zucker to play on Sid's line. I want them to try
Zucker is a forgotten commodity for me at this point on this Pens team. Like, even when he comes back, it might be crazy talk. Is he one of your best 12 forwards? Like, with what he's making, he's going to be in the lineup. But, like, does he deserve to be playing in the 12 forwards over a guy like Drew O'Connor? I mean,
the way the team's been playing now, you can't really justify him going back in. I understand that they snapped their winning streak, but a lot of their winning streak was without Jason Zucker. And it's not like Jason Zucker has really done anything all year.
He's not a bad player.
He's played 30 games.
Like,
he's got 11 points.
We're talking about a $5.5 million player that essentially, like, what does he do much differently than a guy like Dom Simone? You know, where he's a good playmaker, but he's not scoring. And it's
so hard too because no one's going to take him. It's not like an easy trade bait, like because of his cap hit and how little production he's had. You can't even really easily move on from him. You're going to have to throw something in if you wanted to move on from him.
I think you're talking about, I don't know about, yeah, maybe. I'm thinking you're talking about eating salary and getting like a mid-round pick back. Like, but I think that might even be wishful thinking, to be honest with you. It's frustrating. I like Jason Zucker a lot. Seems like a great guy, and it's not like he's a terrible hockey player. It's just with what he's making, kind of, you know, balancing that. He's obviously not returned the investment that the Penguins put into.
Like, if his cap hit was, if him and Brian Russ cap hits were reversed, I would be more okay with him. But it's just the fact that he's the one making $5.5 million that makes it tough.
Right. So don't get me wrong. I watched last week's episode with you and everything like that. I'm a little bit jealous that that I wasn't around to do the last episode. This is completely straying away from Penguins talk at this point, by the way. I'm a little bit jealous that you got to do the episode right after Ben's last home game.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, oh no, wait, you would have done it before. You were doing Ben's memories and stuff.
I was doing it before because it was Monday night.
Right. So this is great.
We haven't technically talked about Ben's last home game.
No one knows the shirt that I'm wearing, by the way, because it's hidden by my mic. But there it is. If you're watching,
that's a great one.
7. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. Anybody that was there, I think, can attest to it, and we all felt the emotions together. Monday Night Football against the Browns, it wasn't the best game that I was at by any means, but it was the best experience that I've had at a sporting event. When you take into consideration, I think, every single emotion that was felt. The best game that I've been at, I'll say, is probably the 2013 NL wildcard game, the Pirates. But just the emotions that were felt that night, anybody that stayed till the end with Ben until that final moment where he walked down the tunnel with his family, I think can attest to this. I've never felt anything like it. I don't think anybody wanted to leave the stadium that night. Everybody would have stayed there if they could, regardless of how cold it was that night. No one cared. Everyone was there. And again, it almost didn't feel like a football game. The fact that they won was great. The fact that it was against the Browns was great. But even before, I was talking to Derek Bell about this before because he was there as well. He came up and was talking to me. It seemed like more of an event than it was a football game because of everybody knowing the magnitude of the situation. Like, this is it. 18 years. Think of it, of how many things, not just in sports, not just with the Steelers, but in your life have changed over this period of time since 2004. But one thing, not just with the Steelers, one thing has been the same about the Pittsburgh Steelers while everything in your life has changed, was QB1, Ben Roethlisberger. It's insane to think about, not just from a sports perspective, but just a life perspective. Again, I was 8 years old when this guy became the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We're 26 now. I'm 26 now.
I'm 26.
It's insane to think about. Yeah, I don't know. I thought maybe your birthday's when?
My birthday's in like a month and a half.
Yeah, you'll be 27 in a month and a half. Okay.
Yeah.
It's insane to think about how much in our life has changed while Ben Roethlisberger being quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers hasn't. I was in second grade. Like, everything was put into this one night, and just watching him get emotional, it was hard not to get emotional yourself. And it's one of those things where I do a really good job, at least now, of being able to take emotion out of sports and separate those two things, even though sports are such a big part of my life. He is somebody that for me has blurred those lines just because of that, what I brought up. It's so much bigger than sports when you think about how much time he has spent with the organization that I love. It's hard to keep that away. And it's hard to put into words. How do you show appreciation for somebody that has no clue that you exist? You know, it's a very weird thing. Like, he'll never know that we're doing this right now, talking about him, right? But it's the least that I can do with everything that he's given to the organization that I love so dearly. So, Ben, anything else that happens from this point is just a cherry on top of what's been a phenomenal career. I'm glad that I get to watch you play at least one more playoff game, 4 more quarters of football, but thank you for everything. I will never in my life forget that scene, everything that happened on Monday night. Again, it was a football game, I guess, but for me, it was just, it was more about Ben.
That's so fun. It's a football game, I guess. That's funny.
Seriously,
but, yeah,
I'm never at any point.
I know. I believe you.
Watching, yeah.
But I'll just add my 2 cents on that game. I was watching it with my fiance Kennedy, and if anybody who knows me knows that I don't show a lot of emotion. But after the game, when Ben is talking in the post game, and it's probably different for you because you're there, you're experiencing it all. But watching on TV, I was getting emotional. For the same reasons that everybody else in the stadium was, for the same reasons you just talked about. This has been my quarterback for nearly 20 years. For the vast majority of my life, he's all I've known for the Steelers. Like I said last week when I did the little pre-show, is that I remember Cordell Stewart barely, and I remember a little bit of Tommy Maddox, but Ben has been my Steelers quarterback for basically my entire life. And it's going to be so weird to not have him there. And I was just getting emotional thinking about that, hearing him talk, and I was tearing up, and she was so excited because she got to see me cry again because she's barely ever seen that. One of the only times that she's seen me cry is at my grandfather's funeral. But and then the next time is at Ben Roethlisberger's last game at Heinz Field. But I just think it's crazy that the Steelers, they went 20 years nearly, or 25 years without a franchise quarterback between Terry Bradshaw and Ben Roethlisberger. We don't know how long it's going to be until we find the next one. Hopefully it's a lot shorter than that time period. But, I mean, just showing appreciation for Ben Roethlisberger for what he turned out to be and winning 2 Super Bowls with the team. But he's been every bit of a great quarterback that we hoped he was whenever the Steelers drafted him. And like you said, like how do you show that you're grateful for somebody that has no idea you exist? But it's tough to say. But anybody who's watching this or listening to this can tell that we have a lot of love for Ben Roethlisberger. We appreciate him, and like I said on the show last week, it's the biggest retirement in Pittsburgh sports since Mario Lemieux.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of big players that have retired or left the city in Pittsburgh since then. I mean, I said last week, the only one that could really come close, I think, is Troy Polamalu. But even then, I don't think it's close.
Yeah. I mean, you talked like just the importance of the position too. I mean, the amount of time, wasn't as long with Troy as it is with Ben. It's hard. It's hard to put into words, and it's gonna be weird. You mentioned weird, seriously, because even like 2019, where he only played 1.5 games, we knew he was coming back. Like, well, I guess we didn't know, but it was assumed that he was going to come back, and that's just Ben. There was no way that he was going to go out on those terms. He had to go out on his terms. I've run out of words really to say. I feel like I've put every word that I possibly could into a tweet at this point. If you follow me on Twitter, my entire life's pretty much tweeted out for you. So it's going to be weird, but thank you, Seven, for this one last run. Thank you for coming back to end things on your terms. 2 more playoff appearances after that elbow injury. So what more can you ask for? I guess Super Bowl, but
hey, you never know.
Other than that, we appreciate you guys watching or listening. Please be sure to subscribe to the channel, DK Pittsburgh Sports, YouTube. You don't need to go anywhere else if you're looking for the best Pittsburgh sports content. Interviews from players and coaches, daily podcasts from us, the independent podcasters, as well as staff podcasts. Obviously, you have the daily shots done by DK himself, Steelers Today videos. Everything that you want as a Pittsburgh sports fan can be found right here. So be sure to subscribe. Leave us a like on this specific video. Let us know in the comments anything that you guys want to see on the show or responses to things that we asked throughout if you weren't able to make it into the live stream that goes up at 2 p.m. every single Monday. So until then, for Smitty, for Tyler, this is Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. Here we go, Steelers. We will talk to you guys next week after hopefully a Steelers W.
Let's go win a playoff game.